Alright, this level's kind of cool. I kind of like it whenever the enemies change, whether it's dark or not. What the fuck just happened? You ever play one of those games in your childhood that you just kind of forget about until a few years later where you find it on the internet? Okay, I know it's very specific, but Spyro the Dragon is one of these games. I distinctly remember going over to one of my relatives' houses to play some old NES and PlayStation games, and Spyro was definitely one of those games. Sure, I never made it past one of the first few levels, but I was, well, a small child. But at the same time, though, it made enough of an impression on me to play more platformers, 2D or 3D platformers, and it led me to play some games like the Sly Trilogy, Jak and Daxter, and some of the Ratchet and Clank games. Years later, I would find this game in a used bookstore out of all places, and I picked it up. Now, this was around the time Spyro was doing the whole Skylander thing, but I was aware of him. But when I finally got home and played the game, I didn't realize this is one of the first video games I ever played. It's kind of like riding a bike, or writing a script in my case. It's something that's familiar and easy to go back to. Plus, I'm not too unfamiliar with the Spyro series. I remember playing A Hero's Tale. That game is fucking garbage, by the way.
A little bit of extra height, but it didn't fucking matter. Either way, keep that in mind as well. Other than that, there's not really anything to explain about infinite jumping.
I also remember playing A New Beginning. Man, I haven't played the game in a long time. So when a buddy of mine who I work with told me to review this game, I said I would. And well, I mean, it took me long enough. So we're going to be looking at the original PS1 version, considering that I don't own a PS4 or an Xbone. I only own a Switch. Yeah, I know, shut up. But I'm not going to have nostalgia blind me from this, considering this is one of the first video games I ever played. So, let's get started. So I think a good place to start is the development of the game. Insomniac Games was a little-known studio out of Burbank with only one game under their belt in 1996, Disruptor, an early PS1 first-person shooter that wasn't a commercial success, but the gaming critics at the time seemed to love it. This was enough to make the publisher Universal Interactive, who's also well known for publishing the Crash games, to publish their game. Now, why a dragon? Well, artist Craig Stint suggested a game made about a dragon, taking inspiration from the movie Dragonheart. You know, the movie where Sean Connery voices a dragon.
You have a beautiful voice.
Well, thank you. We dragons love to sing when we're happy.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. Anyways, Insomniac originally wanted the game to have a more dark and serious approach, but then they decided to go into a more whimsical approach to appeal to a wider audience. Could you imagine a more darker and serious Spyro? That would just be plain... oh. Yeah, I forgot about that game. After the game was released on September 9th of 1998, the game became a critical and commercial success, thanks to in part with Spyro being a demo in Crash 3. Thanks, Naughty Dog. Now, Spyro started up his own trilogy on the PS1, which of course was remade into the Reignited trilogy made this year. But back to the original game. What exactly do you do in this game? Well, a good place to start is the story. In the Land of Dragons, the dragons are being interviewed in a documentary style that reminds me a lot of The Office out of all things. They bash a certain Gnorc, or Gnorc. They spell it with a G, so just go with it. That's pretty much a dick. Nasty Gnorc. After shitting on this dude, and since he can't really take much criticism, he turns every dragon in the 5 dragon worlds into crystal. But he misses just one, that being Spyro, who says he needs to take matters into his own hands and saves all the dragons. And that's, pretty much it. Yeah, the game even has a lighter story than the original Legend of Zelda, but at the same time it gets right to the point. Now the gameplay, well, is a 3D platformer, where you can run, jump, and do whatever attack you can do on a 3D plane. Having controlled the camera with the L2 and R2 buttons on the controller, you can press the triangle button to recenter the camera, and it works well for the most part. The main objective of the game is to free all the dragons that you happen to find in each level, or even in the hub world, and move on to the next thing. This game is a collectathon! A game in which you have to collect a metric crap ton of stuff to move on to the next level, where you have to do more collecting. Now, this style of gameplay was hugely popular in the late 90s, where Super Mario 64 were not only popularized 3D platformers, but collectathons as well, making a slew of games that tried and failed to do what Super Mario 64 did. Now, obviously, this game differs in many ways from Super Mario 64, like the character you play as is a dragon. You can breathe fire and charge your enemies with your horns as a means of attacking. The game doesn't exactly tell you how to do this in a direct tutorial. Rather, the dragons you save throughout the world give you some hints on what's to come in each level. This I actually like. It's not treating the player like an idiot, unlike certain games where you have unskippable tutorials. There are enemies throughout the world that can only be killed by certain attacks just based off their size or if they're wearing metal armor or not. I also like this. It brings more variety into the enemies you encounter, and almost each level has its own Nork, or different kind of enemy type. The most obvious and standout feature of Spyro is the gliding. Now, since Spyro is a young dragon, I'm assuming he can't fly, well, at least most of the time, but we'll get to those levels shortly. After tapping the X button after a jump, you go into glide mode, where most of the time you'll go where the level wants you to go. I say most of the time because gliding in this game can sometimes feel imprecise or difficult to manage, leading to jumping on the same platforms to get to the one damn place where you've been trying to get to, or bottomless pits. You have an option to stop your glide dead in its tracks by pressing the triangle button, which is very useful, but when you just barely miss a platform by hitting the edge of a platform and die, then, well, it makes the game a lot more aggravating. At the same time, though, with the game's wide open levels, Spyro's glide move fits really well in the game in comparison to the Crash series, where things are a lot more linear, where in Spyro's many levels you can roam wherever the level can let you instead of one set pathway. Overall, this is great, just Spyro needs to learn how to jump a little bit higher so this shit doesn't happen. Now, Spyro's fire and charge moves are upgraded in a sense in certain levels throughout the game, where when Spyro gets kissed by a very busty looking fairy, then he'll get a stronger fire attack and a stronger dick. Anyways, sometimes you can also do a supercharge attack in certain parts of the levels, where you can even go faster down a mountain or launch up in different platforms. These supercharged platforms you see way more often in the game in comparison to the fire fairies, and they use it in a good chunk of the levels. You may be wondering, does Spyro die in one hit? And well, thank God he doesn't. Your buddy Sparks the Dragonfly changes color based on how many hits Spyro can take, and you can gain health by killing some enemies and Sparks eating some butterflies. Also, luckily he's not voiced by David Spade. Yeah, that was a thing, and it's about as bad as it sounds.
You breathe fire! So I'm just about ready to blow the top off that place and kick that guy's booty when Spyro let loose with some serious flame, dude.
You also have lives in this game, but in reality, these don't really matter. If you lose all your lives, you're just kicked out of the current level you're in, but you don't lose any of your progress, which is good. Now, I mentioned the game is collectathon, but what exactly are you collecting? Well, you save the aforementioned dragons encased in crystal, but sometimes, like I said before, the dragons can say some helpful hints, but most of the time you'll be hearing this.
Thank you for releasing me.
Thank you for releasing me.
Thank you for releasing me.
You figure a dragon named Thor would sound more threatening. Also, why are none of these fuckers helping me save the rest of the dragons?
Spyro, it's great to see you, but I've got to go.
Well, fuck you, dude. Every time you save the dragon, you have an option to save the game, which is very useful. You also have the jewels which you need to collect to unlock the final level of the game. These colored doohickeys are scattered all across each level in Hub World, and to be honest, these are not too hard to find for the most part. Now, most of the time I can find all the jewels in one go throughout the level, but sometimes you might just miss one. God damn it. Jewels are sometimes inside chests, and some of these chests you need to use a certain attack to break them. Like the metal chests, you need to use the charge attack, or the chest with fireworks where you need to blow it up with your fire attack. There's also lock chests throughout some levels where you need to find a hidden key to get the jewels inside. To be honest though, it's kinda easy to find a key most of the time. You also have the dragon eggs, where you chase these little blue shits in a set pattern to get the eggs. Now when I was younger, I distinctly remember hating these things, but now they're nothing to write home about. They kinda seem to be an afterthought, to be honest with you, because there's only 12 of them throughout the game, in comparison to the 80 dragons you need to save and the thousands of jewels that you need to collect. At the same time though, they're honestly a nice break from the monotony whenever you hear one of these little fuckers laugh in the background. And well, that's about it. There's nothing else to collect, which to be honest, I'm fine with, because there are some games where you have to collect too many things. I'm looking at you, Donkey Kong 64. The game is structured similar to Mario 64, for example, where you have a hub world and you go into different levels, but unlike Mario 64, you can actually do stuff in these hub worlds. There are multiple hub worlds as well, where you collect different dragons, gems, and kill some enemies as well. You jump into these portals where you go into a level and you see how many gems that you collect, and to be honest, it's pretty satisfying. Then you seamlessly go into a level. Even if you quit a level in the game's pause menu, you still get the same effect of flying into the hub world, which, to be honest, is pretty cool. The only other kind of game mode I haven't really mentioned yet is the flying levels. These levels, Spyro actually flies around and uses fire move to burn down certain enemies and items to get gems. The problem with this is, well, you have an extremely strict time limit and you have to get everything in one full go to get full completion. To be honest, I didn't really have many problems with the first few flying levels. They're great deviations from the gameplay that breaks the monotony a bit, but at the same time, fuck Wild Flight. Just fuck Wild Flight. The boats just kept fucking me over at the end of the level, but I finally got it. Speaking of things that look pretty cool, you have the game's levels and its variety. In each hub world, you have a general idea of what to expect. In Artisans, it's a grassy world, in Peacekeepers, it's more like a desert. In Magic Crafters, it's full of castles, and so on. In each level, it plays with Spyro's existing moveset, with the aforementioned Supercharge and Fire Fairies. I should also mention the draw distance. It's very noticeable when you have some levels where you have something in the background like a cliffside or a large playing field, which a lot of levels in this game have. The game renders things far away, but not in a fog or a mist like many other games at the time, but instead it shows what the level has in lesser detail instead of having a fog, which is very impressive for the time. One thing that kind of bothers me though is a handful of levels where Spyro's in a cave or a tunnel, and the camera kind of gets caught on the edges of the level, and it's hard to see where to go. But to be honest, these levels aren't really common. The last thing I need to mention is the bosses, and well, they're fucking pathetic. You call a robot that's stupid enough to show its weakness, or a sheep that's on stilts, a boss. Okay, seriously though, the game isn't hard to begin with, but I didn't really have any trouble with most of these bosses. Almost all of them have a set pattern that you need to recognize, and that's about it. The only boss that really gave me some trouble is in World 2 with this Dr. Shemp guy. I don't know what happened, but it took me a little while to figure out that I just need to wait for him to turn around. Wow, fucking stupid. Going on to the more technical side, the music in the game was handled by Stuart Copeland, who's most known for being the drummer of the band The Police. And I gotta say, wow, this music is pretty damn good. I enjoy most of the tracks that are here, but I can't really see any of them being memorable for me aside from the game's opening theme and Wizard's Peak. I don't know why, I fucking love that song. It's kind of like a mark between action-packed and whimsical. It's really some good stuff. It's no shock that the remake of the game, as far as I'm aware, kept the original music in the game, which shows how good it is. They even kept them on for the next few Spyro games as well. Also, graphically, the game looks impressive for a PS1 game. Animations on Spyro and most of the enemies look fluid for what the PS1 could do, and the levels and hub worlds look varied and colorful, enough to stand out without making the game feel samey. The voice acting is pretty good, just it's, cheesy as fuck sometimes. Whenever Spyro speaks, he always has this 90s toot that really hasn't aged well. But believe it or not, the guy who voiced Spyro is the same guy who also voiced Rocco for Rocco's Modern Life. His name is Carlos Arozwaki, and he lent his voice to a fuck ton of other things. Overall, I would say that Spyro 1 has held up pretty well. With the game being over 20 years old, it's still pretty damn good for an early 3D platformer. The camera is great for the most part, which can really be hit or miss depending on the game for the time. The levels are varied and interesting, and the enjoyable music makes it great. The only real problem I have with this game is the gliding can sometimes feel restricting or imprecise, like I mentioned before, and since that's the main focus of the game, that could be a bit of a problem. As far as I'm aware though, the later games kind of address this, so I would be interested in playing Spyro 2 and 3. Overall, I recommend playing this game. It was definitely a lot of fun. Well, this was a nice little blast from the past. I've had a lot of fun playing this game, and hopefully I could play Spyro 2 and 3. I've never played them before, but I hear they're good. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, subscribe. I know my last video got a lot of views, and I'm really happy for that, and hopefully I can make a schedule out of all these reviews and stuff like that. I think one review per month would be a great idea, and I think that's doable. But until then, hope to see you guys next time, and stay beautiful.